3, 2, 1, roll the footage. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Simon Severino, your host, and my guest today is Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett, University Distinguished Professor. She's among the top 1% most cited scientists in the world. Her revolutionary research in psychology and neuroscience has led to her popular TED Talk with over 6 million views, her books, the most recent ones being How Emotions Are Made and 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And we will deep dive into what the real job is of the brain and many, many misconceptions about brain and emotions that we have that she will deconstruct with us. And let's see where we end up. Welcome, everybody, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
It's really great to be here.
It's amazing to have you here. And for the few people who have not read your book, what is the number one job of the brain?
The number one job of the brain is to regulate the systems of your body. So we, as a culture, we prize thinking, logic, and so we assume that this is the pinnacle of, brain function, that's what brains evolved to do. But that's actually not the case. In fact, right now, for you and for me and for every person listening to us on this podcast, there's a whole drama, a whole symphony of things going on inside your body that you're completely unaware of. There are millions of little moving parts that have to be coordinated and regulated in the most metabolically efficient way for you to stay healthy and to thrive. And everything we think and feel and see and do is really in the service of that regulation, even though we don't experience our lives that way.
And one thing that I found really, really shocking is you say not everybody has emotions.
Yeah, so it's even more shocking than that, actually. So what an emotion is different for different people in different cultures. And in some cultures, there's no real distinction between thinking and feeling. So in, Western cultures, we tend to think of a mind as, at war with itself. You have an inner beast. It's always, seething with instincts and emotions. And you have to, your rational side has to try to control those. And the two pieces are kind of, in a battle throughout your whole life. But in some cultures, thoughts and feelings are part of a unified whole experience. There's no real distinction between those. And actually, the neuroscience evidence suggests that's probably more correct. Your brain is always regulating your body. Your body is always sending information back to your brain about the state of the drama going on inside you. And none of us hopefully experience that directly, because if you did, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and you wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything outside, your own skin, if you were actually aware of all the things that are going on inside. And if you doubt that, just remember the last time that you had gastric distress or that you were feeling ill in some way. The world recedes and you're really focused on what's going on inside your own body. So the way that typically we experience the drama inside our own bodies, what evolution gave us is the ability to have these really simple feelings, feeling pleasant, feeling unpleasant, feeling worked up or feeling energetic or feeling fatigued or calm, feeling comfortable, feeling uncomfortable. These are feelings that are not emotions. They're always with us every waking moment of our lives because they come from the regulation of the body. So really, the architecture of the brain ensures that you never have a moment in your entire life that's without feeling. So feelings and thoughts cannot really be at odds with each other. And in the moments where feelings are not in the foreground, they're just lurking around in the background, really.
And I'm thinking of German literature where you have this metaphor of the horse and the person on the horse, riding the horse, which might be a symbol for, right? We have our animal side, the emotions, but we control them and we can get a kind of a balance of the two.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So actually, that metaphor goes all the way back to Plato, who understood the human psyche as a charioteer controlling two horses.
Mm.
And one horse was instincts, and the other horse was emotions, and the charioteer was rationality. And so the idea is that inside you, you have this ancient beast lurking, these circuits that, for animalistic emotions and instincts, and that your rational brain will control this more emotional, instinctual brain. Sometimes it's portrayed, like you say, in German literature. It's a single rider on a horse. Sometimes you see a rider on an elephant, right? But this idea that we have this inner beast that we have to tame, and that's just a myth. It's just really, it feels that way to us because we've been taught to understand it that way. But that's really not happening. That's really not how your brain works. However, what you said is absolutely right, that we have more control than we know over how we feel and what we do. We might not have as much control as we would like. And the control might not be as easy as we wish it were, but we definitely have more control than we think.
This is fascinating. You say the brain controls the emotion. I have been reading a book recently because you say Plato, which was asking the question who was actually the teacher of Plato, and that goes back to Parmenides and the South Italian wisdom tradition that has not been written so much about because Athens has been writing history. Of course, winners write history and they write forward. And so Athens and Plato, they stand for logical thinking, but really Parmenides and his teachers, they were standing for more of Apollonian pre-logical moments. They were laying down in the dark for hours, waiting for the bigger picture to come, and then they would act and teach and bring it to the practical. So, what's your take on this? Are we really such a logical civilization, or is this just a story that we tell each other?
It's just a story. It's absolutely just a story. I mean, psychologists and other behavioral scientists have loads and loads and loads of experiments showing how people don't often do the logical thing. And then they tell themselves a story to try to make it seem logical, after the fact. But I've really come to the conclusion that logic and rationality is misunderstood. It's misunderstood as the absence of emotion or the absence of feeling. And that's just actually not correct. I think the logical or rational thing to do, let's say financially, right, is to spend what you have, invest what you can, and to not, run a deficit. And that's really what your brain attempts to do for your body. It just, in making those decisions, involves feeling. So I think some of the things that we look at and we go, well, that was really irrational, actually wasn't irrational at all. What the brain is doing, its main job is to run a budget for your body, to keep your body running efficiently in a metabolic sense. I don't experience every hug I give, every insult I bear, everything I read that I love or that drives me insane. I don't experience, that in terms of regulation of my body, but that literally is what's happening. And we really have to take that into account. And if we do, which is really why I wrote 7.5 lessons, if we do, it really changes how we act, how we treat our friends and family and customers and coworkers, it really changes how we understand ourselves as human beings and gives us different ways to try to become the kind of human we really want to be.
Why 7.5 and not 7?
Well, I want to be a little different, you know. Actually, there was a wonderful book written by Carlo Rovelli, the physicist, Italian physicist, called 7 Brief Lessons in Physics. And when I saw that book, I got really excited because a number of years ago, I started writing a book called 6 Facts About the Brain. And I never finished it because I just got really busy with other things. And I thought, that's really great. So I read his book and I thought, well, that 7's a good number, but I just want to be a little different. And it turned out that, you know, there's a really interesting story about brain evolution that's very long and interesting, but it's long. And I was going for, you know, short little essays that people could read, you know, in 20 minutes. And so I thought, well, I'll just tell a bit of that story at the beginning, the part that I think is most important for the book. And it's really just a half lesson. So that was me just trying to be funny, I guess.
How did writing the book, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, change you?
Well, I don't think that any of the information in there changed me because I already had covered a lot of that material in a longer form in How Emotions Are Made. Some of it. There is some material in there that is new. And the material in there that I'd covered before, I'm just doing something different with it than I did in How Emotions Are Made. But I think the way it changed me was, first of all, I've never written essays before in this way. Like I've never written popular essays for a popular audience. I've never attempted to really take my lab coat off and give my opinion about certain things, which I do in the book. And I try to flag for people, you know, I'm taking my lab coat off. I'm now telling you my personal opinion as opposed to what I can justify as a scientist. That was a little scary, I think. And because, you know, one of your questions, which I really loved that you ask your guests, is something about who's a less person or who's someone who zigged when everyone else is zagging or something like that, or who's zags when everyone else is zigging. And I think, you know, everyone can find something to disagree with in my views. So it doesn't matter in the United States whether you're Republican or Democrat, you know, there's always something to disagree with. And so it felt a little fraught for me to say some of the things I say in this book. You know, I make this point about childhood poverty and how it's very bad for brain development in a way that is so pernicious. We really as a species should cure this ill. It's really bad. Normally when people make this claim, though, they make it on moral grounds, and I'm just making it on practical business related grounds. You know, I'm making this claim on not just on the basis of science, but on the basis of, you know, finances and on the basis of human capital. Like business owners should care about this because those little brains become the workforce of the next generation. And a good business person invests in the future. They don't just think about today. And, you know, what's interesting is that, to me, is that what I was afraid of really was that everyone would find something to disagree with. So the people who, you know, are very, you know, the people who are very liberal would not like the tone of the argument, and the people who are very conservative would not like the message, meaning, you know, that childhood poverty is not really as important as it actually really is. But actually what I found was that it seems like what's happened is it's really united people instead of, you know, arguing with people. And I think that's an important lesson, because sometimes the things that you're most concerned about are the things that can have the biggest impact and can teach you the most,
Now that you know so much about the brain and about emotions, do you live a completely different life? How does a day in the life look like?
I would say yes. So I'm very data driven as a person, meaning uh, I don't believe I don't go with my own stories, or what seems intuitive to me, or what seems um, realistic to me. I'm really very data driven. So if an experiment comes out and it's very well designed and it's very generalizable, we'll probably, change our behavior to adhere to it. So I would say when I started this journey a number of years ago, we've changed almost everything about our lives. We change how we eat. We change what we eat. Um, I've always exercised every day as an adult, but now I do it in a different way than I did before. I also try to get I can say that I try to get 8 hours sleep. I don't get 8 hours sleep, but I do always get 6 or 7 hours sleep. That's, but I mean, I lived probably for 20 years of my life where I was getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep, sometimes three, sometimes none. Um, I run a big lab, and it's kind of like a small business running a big lab. You're constantly looking for revenue. You're constantly looking for money to run your experiments, to pay your staff, to, you have all these young lives that you're responsible for their paths forward. At the same time, I have a family, and that I have to take care of. And so, I wasn't sleeping very much for a very long time. And it turns out that's really bad. Like, sleep is probably the most important thing that you can change in your life, to get more sleep, to get enough sleep. So, and I would say, yeah, I mean, I take some of the scientific understanding, like, for example, our brains construct everything we experience. And I take that really seriously in my life. It leaves me more curious. It leaves me more humble. And it also allows me to protect myself. If someone criticizes me in a way, my my first thought is, oh, that's just electrical activity in somebody else's brain. And it just like diffuses and then when I'm feeling a little stronger, I can come back and actually try to listen to what they said, and see if there's something in it that's useful for me. But yeah, I live very, very differently. And what's really nice for me is that I think at this point, I probably have, thousands of emails from people emailing me and telling me that they've read 7.5 Lessons, where they've read How Emotions Are Made. And it's completely changed their lives. And that's extremely gratifying.
I want to know more about all of this. And the first question is, now that you know that everything is electrical activity, did this make you more spiritual or less?
Nobody's ever asked me that question. That's a great question. I would say it's probably made me more spiritual, but maybe not in a way that is conventional. So, I mean, I think I've always really gravitated to things that are miraculous. And the things that are miraculous, I mean, of course, there's the sky, the stars and the ocean, and, there's crickets. I've developed this real love of the sound of crickets at night, like, especially in the summer here, you're completely enveloped by this symphony of sound at night. It's just breathtaking. But I think I've also, you can find little miraculous moments, lots of places in your life, lots of moments in your life. And I've learned, I think, to really appreciate those. And what that does for me is it cultivates a sense of wonder and awe, which makes me feel I'm insignificant in a good way. I mean, small in a good way, meaning whatever problems I have, whatever stresses are going on for me in the moment, there's a bigger, wider universe of miraculous things. And just getting that perspective just for a moment gives my nervous system a break. And that's really, really helpful. Also, I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate more is that as humans, we're animals, we're social animals. Our nervous systems are intimately connected with each other and with other animals that we cohabitate with, like dogs, cats, pets, but other animals too. And that can sound very gauzy and very, but it's actually very concretely scientific also. So, the best thing for a human nervous system is another human. The worst thing for a human nervous system is another human. Our electrical signals are intertwined in very profound and concrete biological ways. So this interdependence that we have is not something that we are, at least in our sort of Western way of seeing things, not something that we're used to thinking about and that we often resist. We prize individual rights and freedoms. And as we should, I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it does sometimes come directly at loggerheads or in conflict with this interdependence that we have as humans and as a social species. And so I think one consequence for me in my own life is that I now think a lot more about my impact on other people.
And I have to ask you this question: what is beauty? So why can we, in some situations, be in this oceanic moment, in this experience, and experience beauty and calmness, if everything is just electrical signals? Why?
Because it isn't just electrical signals. It is, but right. So Carlo, when I was reading Carlo Rovelli, I have to say, I've never really understood physics, and I've never really understood quantum mechanics. It completely puzzles me, right? But he wrote this really, so he wrote, 7 brief lessons about physics. It's a very poetic book. It's very lovely. But the book I really loved is, I have it sitting here, right, so just over there, is called Helgoland. And in this book, he explains his relational view of quantum mechanics. And I'm reading this book and I'm realizing, this is what I write about, except I'm writing about it in terms of neuroscience. And right. So basically he makes this, he sort of walks you very patiently through this series of explanations that, physical signals have no inherent meaning. They're only a signal, a quantity of something, a signal like an electrical signal is only meaningful in relation to something else. And that's a hard thing to understand without going through all the logic of his book. But fundamentally, this is also true about the brain. It's true about how the brain works. When one neuron is talking to another neuron, the function that's being performed there is of that one neuron is dependent on which neuron is receiving it. So exactly the same signal can mean very different things to very different other, to multiple neurons. And what's going on is that in this symphony of entwined signals, what we're doing essentially is we're making meaning of the signals that come from our bodies and that come from the world. So without those, the meaning of any signal from the world isn't in the world. It's actually in your brain relative to your body. So even though your thoughts and your feelings and everything comes, what you see, what you hear, comes from these physical signals, those physical signals are, it's a kind of magic in a sense, because we don't really understand how those physical signals give rise to what we see and what we hear, but they do. And things in the world and things in the body that are going on become meaningful really in the brain. Your brain is a meaning maker. And so it's a mysterious and wonderful thing. And one day, scientists will crack the answer to that mystery.
And the good news is, you say, we are not completely out of control and emotions run us. We actually create, and we are somehow in control. And you have even found more control. You know now more how to eat and how to exercise. What changed in your eating and exercising principles?
Well, we try, not to channel Michael Pollan, the author. We try to eat real food, right? So now I'm a great lover of bread. I am not ashamed to say I totally love bread. But, bread is really, at least the way it's made, here, is really a dessert. It's not really, or, yogurt, for example, right? So you walk into a supermarket and, yogurt has all of these like little candies in them, or little, or jam or whatever. It's like dessert. It's not breakfast food, right? Or, you look at a muffin, and a muffin is really just a cupcake, without the icing. So I think that I'm trying to think actually about, food from the perspective of my actual body, not what tastes good. And I say this as someone who loves French fries, who loves chocolate, who loves, bread, as I said. But for example, there's research to show, and this is miraculous, this research. I'm just blown away by it. That every species that's ever been studied, with the exception of 2, will eat to a protein. They'll eat to meet a protein, to a threshold of protein. They're trying to hit a protein quotient. And that's even true of humans. So when you walk into your kitchen, or you go to a restaurant, you're not consciously aware, like, oh, I haven't made my whatever grams of protein today, so I better eat protein. No, that's not what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, that looks delicious, so that doesn't look like it's going to taste very well. I really have a craving for whatever. But actually what's happening is you will overeat carbohydrates, you will overeat fat, you will overeat every nutrient in order to meet that protein target. And that's what animals do. And they do it completely. Slime molds do it. The number of animals that do it, and there are these miraculous, like, natural events that occur that demonstrate that this is actually what's going on. And so now I use that principle very, so I think about actually, how much protein is available in a meal, and we will actually change the complement of our meal. And I would say, we eat more vegetables, and, so there's research, for example, which shows that failure to eat, salads and things with a lot of fiber in them, natural fiber in them, it predisposes you to cancer as much as smoking. That's a shock. But so things like that, I would say that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pay attention to my body budget to make it easier for my brain to regulate. And that has the effect of less distress, less fatigue, And that makes it easier for my brain to make emotions that are not unpleasant.
And you were always exercising daily, but you changed the way you exercise. What was the shift?
So you know, I really like to lift weights. And I like to lift heavy weights, you know. So that was always my goal, to lift as heavy, lift as heavy weights as possible, as frequently as possible. I mean, that's what I like to do. I'm not really, you know, um, I always thought about stretching and breathing and things like that, like, like paced breath, like with yoga. I've always thought about those things as sort of like not really exercise. Real exercise is where you're like sweating and grunting and, it feels unpleasant, but then later it feels really good. And what I've come to realize is that actually stretching and like rolling, with a roller, and stretching and conditioning in your muscles and so on in that way actually is super important. I mean, like sometimes more important. I'm recovering from spinal surgery, Simon, which is why we've had to reschedule this conversation so many times. And, my recovery is, according to my surgeon, miraculous and very smooth. And the reason why is that I plotted the whole thing out using science, a lot of the science, that's in 7.5 Lessons and in How Emotions Are Made. And I'm not saying that it wasn't painful and that it wasn't challenging, but it was, and that it's a long process, much longer than I imagined it would be. But I think, I've learned that your physical strength isn't really primarily about how much you can bench press, or, how much you can, squat. It's a lot of it has to do with, can you hold your torso upright? Can you sit? Can you walk with good posture? Can you, do you have flexibility? Do your ligaments and your tendons move with fluidity? And so a lot of I now spend probably 3 to 4 hours on conditioning a day, partly because I'm recovering from surgery, but also what I'm doing is I'm walking more, I'm running less. I'm not running at all. I mean, I don't think I'll ever run again. Probably sprints, I think, are out of my bicycle sprints, maybe, but not running. So, and I pay a lot more attention to my breath, which again sounds very new agey, but actually your breath is the one way. Your breath and drinking water. Your breath, drinking water, and sleeping. Those are like the major ways that you can control immediately the systems in your body. For example, if you hydrate yourself well in the morning, you will not feel tired in the afternoon, because the main symptom of dehydration is fatigue. It's not thirst.
I resonate so much. I've just reduced the amount of coffee that I drink, and I'm just drinking more tea than coffee per day, and that is a huge difference in how my body feels, how my energy level is, how my mind feels. My head.
So it's exactly what I do too. I had to stop drinking coffee. I'm a great coffee lover, actually, and for years and years and years. But coffee is like borrowing energy from tomorrow for today.
Yeah, and it's also, what is it? Now that I know the tea energy, now I can say, well, the coffee energy is different. It's a little bit like 2 meters above the ground. I'm a little bit too high on coffee. It's like a drug.
It is, but I don't know about you, but I still, when someone else is having coffee, I still have a good smell. You know how I get a good whiff? Because it's just so, it's like a drug. It's like a drug. Yeah.
Yes, and I have allowed myself. I can have one coffee after every meal, and that's fine. That's fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, this is fascinating. So the radical constructivism, we create meaning. Meaning is not out there. So when somebody criticizes you, you can help yourself by saying, all right, that's just electrons coming over here. and then you can maybe with a little bit more intention look at how you are creating meaning and if it's really necessary and if it's serving you.
Exactly. Or, when you wake up in the morning and you feel like crap, or, things go wrong in your day and you just like, I have some moments sometimes where I think, I hate my life. I absolutely I hate everything. Everything just feels so bad. And then I stop and I think, no, I don't hate my life. Everything is not so bad. I'm just having a body budgeting moment, my butt, there's got, and so in the morning now when I wake up, I'll say to my husband, he'll say, how did you sleep? And I'm like, I think it's going to be a difficult body budgeting day today. So I'm just, and so his reaction to that is to give me a hug, right? Not to, be irritated with me or to, like, oh, she's so moody. It's like he gives me a hug. And then I really do. I make sure I go for a little longer walk, maybe, or, maybe I have a little bit more tea, or maybe I, hug my dog a little bit more frequently, whatever it is. The point is that it's our natural propensity. And actually, there's a whole evolutionary story here. If we had time, it would be interesting to talk about. But it's a whole evolutionary story here about why it is that when we feel bad, we assume something is wrong in the world. So we look to the world to go, well, what is it that makes, what is it? What is, we're attempting to connect what's going on inside the body with what's going on around in the world. And that is what emotions are. And sometimes it's important to make that connection and to do it with precision in a way that helps you, guide your actions in a productive way. But sometimes the right solution is to not make an emotion and to just understand it in physical terms. And that's radical because in Western culture, if you do that, you're usually diagnosed with an illness. But it's not an illness. It's actually what it is employing scientific understanding. And that gives you flexibility. So sometimes feeling like shit means something is wrong in the world. Sometimes it means you just didn't sleep enough, or you need to drink a little bit more water, or you need a hug from your best friend.
I was thinking about Dexter. Do you know Dexter?
Yeah.
So, and what the fascination is, I find it fascinating. And it seems everybody, because it's on Netflix, it's one of the big stories that we like to hear. And maybe that's the dichotomy of, hey, feelings is something you can engage with, but you can also not. What's your take on this?
Yeah, exactly. And what's funny about that is when people talk about logic and rationality as the absence of feeling, I'm like, no, psychopathy is the absence of feeling. Like, actually, would you want to judge or in a court case who had no feeling? I don't think you would. I mean, feelings are a source of wisdom. I mean, they also can be a real pain in the ass. Don't get me wrong. And they can, but you do have more control than you think you do. And that control requires effort and I mean, I don't mean effort in the moment when you're trying to regulate. I mean, effort before the moment. It's like regulating is like a skill. It's a skill you have to build. It's actually a whole toolbox of skills that you have to build, and you can practice those skills before you need them, so that when you need them, they're right there automatically. You can just use them really effortlessly, the way you would read words on a page or understand, the words that somebody else speaks. And I talk a little bit about that. I have a chapter or two about that in How Motions Are Made, to give people some, suggestions for some skill building that they might want to do.
Yeah, it sounds like really important skill training. Today, I was training myself in having less emotion, because I was buying equities and crypto assets. So this is a moment where you don't want to have emotions. And then when this is over and I go over to my kids and to my wife, this is where I want to be emotional. And so I guess a day in everybody's life is about this skill training.
I might might say it a little differently. So I don't buy cryptocurrencies, but I do make financial decisions, and I make financial decisions not just for myself and my family, but you know, I have the lives of 25 people, young people in my lab whose lives their careers very much depend on the financial decisions I make.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that I actually try to look for the feelings that are lurking in the background and that might influence me. I think the problem really lies not with whether the feelings are there or not, because they are there, Simon. They're there. They might not be in the foreground, but they can't not be there unless you don't have a neurotypical brain. I mean, your brain architecture ensures that they're there, but they could be influencing you in ways
I
that you
check
don't
the
know.
fear and greed index before I buy or sell.
Exactly. But so what you're doing there really is you're not saying, oh, I don't have fear and greed. You're saying, I'm going to bring these things into the foreground where I can see them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to weigh them appropriately. They're just sources of information that you weigh.
Exactly.
And you might decide to weigh them high, or you might decide to weigh them low. If you decide to weigh them low, that's not the same as saying they're not there. And I think that's important. That's important because you're really tricking yourself if you think they're not there, because they are. You're just not seeing them.
Fear 23, this is when I buy, because when the market is fearful, you want to buy. And and when the market is greedy, that's 45. When the market is greedy, you want to sell, because now everybody is on it, which means it's soon over. It's at the top.
Yeah, that's thanks. I'm going to write that down.
Mm-hmm. Fear and greed index, really important. It took me 42 years to get this, but it's really important. The emotions of the markets, first, they are cyclical. There are short waves and long waves. And second, you have to go anti-cyclical. If you want to buy low and sell, because there is a psychology, and sell high, because there is a psychology of the markets, and most investors, just 1% are these smart professional investors. 99% are people like me and you. They just go in, they try to do the right thing, but they usually are too late or too early because of psychology.
Although, I'm reminded of something I read that Warren Buffett said, which is how he got incredibly wealthy was by losing a little bit of money. So, he always would sell too early and buy a little too late, or what? Yeah, it was something. Yeah. So,
but he would also hold for 25 years. Just one decision, Coca-Cola, and then he holds it for 25 years. The next decision, Apple, he holds it the next 25 years. So he's aware of the emotions of the market and of the others, but he decides if he gets emotional and when.
Yeah.
He read your book.
He probably could have written my book. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Please, everybody, go and grab these books. How Emotions Are Made, 7.5 lessons about the brain. And because they can shorten your recovery phase after surgeries. So what else do you want from a book? Is there anything I forgot to ask you, Lisa?
Well, I'm enjoying this so much, Simon, that I think we could talk for hours. So I probably will say yes. I'm sure there are many things we didn't talk about that we could, but
you have to come back when your next book comes out. And who should be my next guest?
I've been thinking about that quite a bit. I was actually thinking about this. I love this question about who is a person who is zigging when everyone is zagging. And I was thinking, actually, there are a lot of people. Like in every domain of life, there are people who are doing this, right? So my first thought, of course, was of my peeps in my lab. They're all zagging when everybody's zigging by virtue of the fact that they work with me. I mean, they're, the perspective they're taking is very different than the sort of mainstream psychological perspective. So, but I was thinking, Liz Cheney, she's someone who in the United States who clearly is doing something very different than her fellows. And I have great admiration for her because she is zagging to great cost, actually. but for the right reasons, I think. And then I saw this article in the New York Times this morning about these CEOs who are have gone out of their way to use their economic power for political good, which is not typical these days for CEOs to think of themselves as the of these big, companies, to think of themselves as the stewards of democracy. In this article, it was so interesting, and the one that really caught my attention was Jim Fitterling, who is, I can't remember what he's the CEO of, some very large company, who suspended political contributions to members of the US Congress who opposed the certification of the 2020 election. And I thought, that guy has balls, seriously. I was very impressed by that. There's another person who I recently started reading her book. Her name is Michelle Goodwin, and she's a professor of law at the University of California. And she has a book called Policing the Womb, Invisible Women and the Criminalization of Motherhood. And she wrote an op-ed in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago where she tells this story of that she had an abortion when she was 12, and how it saved her life, basically. And she had this abortion because she was being sexually assaulted by her father in childhood. And what impressed me about this woman is that she is in the New York Times, is speaking about things which people don't speak about. And she's not speaking about them from a position of victimhood. She's speaking about them as part of the story of what made her who she is. And I found that very impressive. Just the way that she made decisions and the way that she understands, the way that she has constructed a story for herself where she's not a victim and she's not a hero. She's just stepped out of that narrative completely. That's a narrative that is very alive in, I don't know if it's all Western culture, but certainly in the United States, there are victims there. You can't be a hero without there being a victim. You can't be a victim without there being a villain. So every story has to have a villain, and she just sort of sidestepped that entire narrative, which I thought was pretty miraculous, actually. I have great admiration for her. And I don't know her. I mean, personally, I don't know her, but I thought that was amazing. And then the last person I thought of was, I work at a university. I actually work at two universities. I work at Northeastern University. That's where my primary appointment is. I don't talk very much nobody asks me about it, and I don't talk very much about it. And if you asked me to criticize it, I'd be very happy. I mean, every academic can criticize their university. But yesterday I had lunch with the provost of the university, David Madigan. And what we talked about primarily was his efforts to reimagine what universities are, completely reimagine what universities are. And there are a number of efforts that are going on around the world to reimagine what universities are, what they do, and what scholarship is, and how to bring it better in a way that's more efficient to the people who need it, that is the consumers, like business owners and medical workers and teachers and in K through 12 and so on. And I thought it was so inspiring and impressive. And I can't really say that it was unusual for me. I'm more of a critic usually of higher education than I am a cheerleader in some ways. I think because I'm in it, I can see what the problems are. But his vision was really quite inspiring, I thought. And it had a lot to do with taking knowledge from what we would call interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work, which is a buzzword and everyone thinks it's really great, but actually implementing it is harder than you might think. And I thought he would also be an interesting person to talk to. So I think any of those people would be really interesting for you to talk to, or Carlo Rovelli.
Oh yes, I wrote down 2 books that I want to read from him. You inspired me. Helgoland and the seven principles of physics.
The 7, yeah. Although I have to say, there's also this other book that I'm reading now, which I totally am I'm totally involved with. I'm actually listening to it on tape and I'm reading it. It's called The Dawn of Everything, The New History of Humanity. It's a very controversial book, but what's interesting about it is they're writing about, it's an anthropologist and an archaeologist, and they're using anthropological and archaeological evidence to talk about the history of the invention of inequity and where does inequity come from. And they're challenging the whole story of human social evolution, that we were hunter-gatherers and very egalitarian, and then we started farming and accumulating wealth, and then that led to, civilization, which led to inequity, which, they're just taking it apart piece by piece in a way that is absolutely fascinating. Like, I can't attest to the scientific validity of it because I haven't gone back to read. I'm still trying to understand their argument, and then I'll go read the actual papers, but it's quite an argument, I have to say. It's like completely fascinating. So anybody who's interested in business or in money should probably read this book. It's a roller coaster ride for sure.
The Dawn of Everything. I wrote it down. And you reminded me that I have met Dimitri Chamblas, who was at that moment the dean of the Californian University of the Arts. And so a per se multidisciplinary role, because you have, the choreographers and the musicians, etc., and the different departments. And he asked everybody, so he came in as the new dean, and his first intervention was to co-author a book with everybody. And he said, please, if you could think university from zero, what would you do? And everybody wrote a chapter. And of course, this book never became a mainstream book, but it's a wonderful book. And it's all about, at the end, these concepts are quite similar. And they are half choreography, half arts, half entrepreneurship. Very practical.
Yeah, that sounds, what's it called?
Do you remember? He is called Dimitri Chamblas.
Okay.
Moved from Paris to Los Angeles. The exact book title, I have to search it.
That's okay. I'll find it. Yeah. Great.
But he asked the question, how would you completely create a curriculum from scratch?
Yeah, exactly. And so I was just so inspired. I was so inspired talking to the provost yesterday. And it was a really eye-opening conversation. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for being on the show. Please write another book quickly and bring it to us. We want to read the next one.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.